You all know that we've been talking about how the world has changed, how it has gone from being 8% urban in 1900 to over 50% in 2000. I need to say also that the church demographics have also shifted. It was estimated by David Barrett, a great counter of Christians, who wrote the World Christian Encyclopedia and then rewrote it in 2 volumes 20 years later. David Barrett said that in 1900, over 80% of the world's Christians were white, northern, and western. The good news is that by 1980, the majority of the world's Christians were non-white, non-northern, and non-western. More recently, we have learned, a Canadian demographer, Paul Marshall from Toronto, has tweaked this just a little bit to say this, that we now know that over 80% of the world's active Christians are non-white, non-northern, and non-western. Now, my first response to those kind of numbers go like this. Missionaries, you did it. You got the gospel over the ocean, through the jungle, over the desert. The church is bigger over there now, by far, than it is here. At the same time, the cities are growing in those same countries. The Church of Jesus Christ is growing in those same countries. It is absolutely stunning that those numbers are growing the way they are. I would like to take you on a little imaginary tour of Africa. If you read Jenkins and other writers who are talking about the next Christendom, the way the church will look in the future, some of what I say and think will be very familiar to you. And that is that Africa may become, fairly soon, the center of gravity of the Christian church in the world. It is estimated by scholars, Andrew Walls and many others, that Africa has been turning Christian at the rate of about 17,000 people per day. It is an extraordinary reality that the number of people who have come to Christ, called themselves Christian, maybe just removed from tribalism, and in some cases maybe more tribal than Christian, we can grant that, but it is an extraordinary thing. What I would like to do is to show you in a small way with 4 stops on our airplane what God is doing in some remarkable settings in cities. Because we don't often think of Africa in terms of cities. But in 1982, I had my first doctoral student, and we counted 18 cities in Africa that were 1 million or more people. My student was from Ghana, and Ponsakufor, and in 1995, a Roman Catholic scholar, Aylward Shorter, published a little book. He's a scholar from England, but he spends most of his time in Nairobi. His little book stunned me. I picked it up in Nairobi. He was projecting the fact that in 2000, which is now 4 years ago, there would be 96 cities in Africa of 1 million or more people. Now there are 400 in the whole world, about 420 maybe. 420 cities or so of 1 million or more people. Almost 1/4 of the world's 1 million+ cities are Africa. This continent is changing, and the church is exploding in many of these areas. Well, on our first flyover, I'm going to take you to the 4 points of the African compass and back, and I just want to tell some stories. I want to encourage you that the church in Africa is grabbing hold of the urban agenda. If we come into Cairo, we'll fly over the pyramids. It's always fun. We'll land in Cairo and we'll go on a wild ride. Their taxi drivers are old tank drivers, I think. And we'll go downtown, and I would like to take you through old Cairo. Actually, we'll go by where Moses and Jesus lived. In fact, they'll take you to where they lived. I mean, those communities haven't moved. And we'll go through medieval Cairo. We'll go up on the east side of Cairo, up on the mountain to Makadam Mountain. I want to take you to a garbage dump. Now there are 7 garbage dumps, maybe more by now, in Cairo. More than 70,000, mostly Christians, are the garbage collectors. It's an old idea. Christians in the early church were garbage collectors many times. In the Muslim world, that's one of the jobs the Christians could get. And so there was a priest of the Orthodox Church named Saman who started a Sunday school class in the garbage dump in the early 1980, 81. I first went there and met with Christians in a cave. It was a small cave. It was a cave that couldn't have held more than 50 or 60 people. A couple years later, I went back to the garbage dump on the east side of Cairo. Makata Mountain. Again, if you're in Cairo, it's up under the TV antennas. It's the high mountain on the east side of Cairo. Cairo has 12 million people, and every day 3 million come in to work and leave at night. Can you imagine exhaling and inhaling 3 million people? That's Chicago coming and going every day in Cairo. The garbage people had their little carts and their little donkeys, and the children were sitting in the garbage, taking excrement and plastic and glass and sorting it, and they would make their living that way. Father Saman started the little church. The stories are very interesting about this. I won't go into the background, but Father Saman then started the church out of his Sunday school class. He went to the Pope of the Coptic Orthodox Church and he wanted to be a priest, and they said, well, it takes 3 years. He said, give it to me in 3 months. He didn't have any more time than that. And so the Pope Shenouda, one of the popes of the ancient churches, gave him a crash course, and he learned how to be a priest in 3 months. And he went up there and started this church. And when I came back in 1982, they had built a building in the middle of the garbage dump. In fact, it was in National Geographic. It was such a stunning looking thing, this white church building in the garbage community of Cairo. You still walk by the chirping rats and everything to get to it, but that was the church in the garbage dump. Meanwhile, I went with the dentist one day to pull out the teeth, and that's what this dentist was doing. That's all he could do. He had a little stool seated on the side of the hill, and he gave me a job. My job was to wave the towel in front of the open mouth so the flies wouldn't go in while he was extracting the teeth. And I did that for the whole morning. And then he took me up, this dentist did, to the prayer mountain, to the little cave, and he sat down and told me about the church that was starting there and how excited he was for that. Okay, next time I come back, there's not only a church in the garbage dump. I go back up the hill where the cave was, and I find the cave is bigger now. It has 2,500 seats. The church is growing in the garbage dump. All of a sudden, I notice there's some recycling going on in the garbage dump and a few mechanized tools to sort the garbage. A couple years later, I'm back in the garbage dump. The cave that had 2,500 is now the youth cave. 2,500 seats for the youth group. And I am taken into a concrete tunnel that for all the purposes, I thought it's like going down into a major football stadium. And I looked to the right and I saw, and could hardly believe my eyes, 10,000 seat cave sanctuary carved out of that ancient mountain. On Thursday nights in Cairo, there will be 6,000 or 7,000 people in a Bible study. And Father Saman will stand up there, his beard and his robe, and he'll teach the Bible to thousands of Egyptian young people. And they come through the garbage dump to get to the church. Is that a good story? The church is making a difference in Cairo. And the garbage people are going to school now. They have clinics now. They don't sit in the garbage all day. They have hope. The gospel came, the church came, they dug the mountainside, and they're turning it into a Christian theme park. It is quite extraordinary. Now tour buses come up. They can hardly believe what is going on. You'll understand if I say it's the Egyptian version of Willow Creek. But Willow Creek eat your heart out. It's a bigger church than Willow Creek. And it's in Cairo where you wouldn't expect it. Welcome to Africa. You know, the Christmas story is about an Asian-born baby who became an African refugee. And Jesus came to Cairo, and everybody there who's a Christian celebrates that our Lord visited us. And they will tell you that story and they will celebrate it. I wish I could take you to some of the other parishes around Cairo, but you get the feeling that in that city there is a ministry. Wonderful things are happening. Habitat is working there. Campus Crusade, Mother Teresa, they're all there and they're working together. It is amazing what is happening in Cairo, but we have to get in our airplane and cross the continent, Abidjan. 26 countries in Africa speak French. That's quite extraordinary. There are 46 French-speaking countries in the world on 5 continents, but 26 of them are in Africa. Abidjan is maybe the most civilized, although they've had a lot of trouble lately. By civil, I mean they had an upscale economy, a good education system. But like most of these coastal areas of Accra and Benin and so on, Togo, the interior is moving south, and these cities are growing faster than the infrastructures can handle. But I would like you to meet, as I would have you meet Simone here, I would have you meet Simone. Simone Nanjoui is a layman. Simone worked for the government of the late president of the country. He was in charge of housing. He was also a Methodist, a Pentecostal. He had a beautiful home up on the hill, a Mercedes, a gorgeous wife, and 5 kids. But like people were jealous of Daniel, looking for ways to get him in trouble, there were people who were so jealous of him because the president of the country loved him very much, he was so honest and everything, that somebody illegally cooked the books in his, messed up his accounts, and then accused him publicly, and he didn't defend himself, and he ended up going to jail for 18 months. In jail, a jail so crowded that they're stacked in cells and they sleep on the floor like human burritos. Nobody feeds you in African prisons. So a young couple named Borgman came and they saw 8 people sitting out in the hot sun in the prison in Abidjan. They said to their friend, "What's that?" "Oh, those are the people who are going to die today." They brought them out of the cells, nobody to feed them, and they put them in the hot sun to kill them quicker. And this young missionary couple had no idea what to do, so they ran back home and cooked 8 meals. They came back to give the 8 meals, and one had already died. They fed the 7. Little did they know, but inside that same prison, Simone was preaching the gospel. A revival broke out in the prison. This young couple kept bringing food. Pretty soon they had to organize the whole city to cook meals because hundreds of people were coming to Christ in the prison. The government was very embarrassed. Very embarrassed. Revival in the prison, Muslims coming to Jesus. So they called Simone in before the court and said, "Simone, you have to leave." He said, "You can't do that. You promised me 18 months. He went back to jail and he stayed there preaching the gospel. I came along. This is the honest truth. Out of that prison came a whole chain of house churches. An entire denomination of house churches has come from that prison in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. And Simone, when I last saw him, was running for mayor. And Simone has 3 businesses. He's a layman. And he gives 10% of each time to his 3 businesses, 10% to each one. So 30% of his time he gives to the business world, and then he spends 70% of his time doing prison fellowship. He's on Colson's International Prison Fellowship Board. He is a Charles Colson of the French world. Simone Nanjoui. Did you know that you could plant churches out of prison? I had no idea you could do it quite like that. That's just like planting willow creeks and garbage dumps, huh? It's happening, my friend, in Africa. Well, let's go on down here to Pretoria. Pretoria is 30 miles north of Joburg and 30 miles from another city called Soweto, which doesn't appear on the maps of the Afrikaners because Soweto just meant southwest area, Soweto, and it was just a region. But Soweto is larger than Johannesburg. Pretoria is a capital, one of the capitals of South Africa. I would like you to meet Stefan de Beer, Afrikaner kid from a single mom family, has a sister. They both went to the seminary. The seminary there is Afrikaner Reformed. This young man, Stefan, developed a concern for what he called the black boys who were running on the streets of the city. And if those black boys who showed up in Pretoria during the day weren't out at night, they were shot as target practice by police. And so Stefan, in between and after, and by the way, I was on his PhD committee as the second reader of a 600-page dissertation. Stefan is a classically trained person from a scholar home. But Stefan started walking out in the streets. He started falling in love with these black kids. And he finally convinced a friend to open up the parish house and give him a key. And what he did, every afternoon, he would have the kids go inside the parish house so they wouldn't be shot. And they were his boys. He was doing this while he was getting an MDiv at the seminary, under the eyes of the government, which was very anti-black, Pretoria being a capital. No blacks allowed in the city. One day the police came to show you how angry and how desperate they were. They torched the church parish hall and they killed 8 boys. 8 of Stefan's boys died in that fire. He will tell you, as he has told me, that he almost lost it at that moment and just chucked it. But he went back in, and Stefan is now organizing. He's got a network in South Africa that won't quit. It is a network of people working with youth. Now, how significant this is, I can only say that in Africa, as in many other developing countries, the median age is under 16. The median age in the United States among whites is about 33, I think, at the moment. It's 28 or so with blacks. It's 24 with Hispanics. It's 16 in Mexico and in many of the Muslim countries and in many African countries, which means the population will double in 12 to 15 years. It means the median age of half the population is under 16 years of age. That's what it means when you say median age, 16. So youth ministry is strategic in every part of these worlds. One of the alarming things I've experienced is the missionaries that we send overseas now are less and less in touch with youth reality. Most denominations now and mission agencies require experienced church planters to go overseas. And so the people who go overseas from our continent are usually people who are bonding with their own teenagers. Whereas the traditional missionaries used to be in their early 20s, easy to learn the language. They used to bond with the kids. The truth is, this is a huge gap in missions today. Very few mission agencies are working with youth. And youth are everywhere. And youth without parents are everywhere because of AIDS, as you know. And so this is a huge reality. Well, Stefan is a reminder. His network of youth leaders, his capacity to be both a scholar, do a PhD, and also be a youth outreach worker, and to connect. He's in charge of all the churches. He's brought it together in the heart of downtown Pretoria is a web of influence on urban youth that reaches out not only into Soweto, but into all of the former Bantustans of the black communities. And it's wonderful to behold. So we can see a variety of ministries, the garbage church, the prison church, the youth church. We get back on the plane and head for Addis Ababa. Addis, on any list of 50 poorest cities in the world would be in the top 3. Probably 1 or 2 in Cameroon, statistically poorer. But the World Bank has said Addis is the poorest city in the world. Jember Tefera is the wife of the former mayor. When the emperor was killed in 74 and deposed the mayor of Addis, Jember, of course, was thinking she'd be a widow, but her husband was not killed. He was put in prison for 8 years. Jember fed him for 3 years. Twice a day she had to take meals to prison, never saw him for 3 years. Then she was put in prison for 5 years. She was put into a cell that was about 15 meters by 40, and there were 150 women and 1 Turkish toilet, and she was assigned the job of cleaning it. She was hated by everybody because she was royalty. She was related to the emperor, and her husband was mayor, related also to another emperor. Jember started a Red Cross course in the prison. 5 years later, and by the way, she was never charged, she was let out of prison, and Jember was permitted to go back in because she wanted to make sure all her kids, all the women got their Red Cross certification. So even though they let her out, she kept going back until everybody got certified. Then she went off to Manchester and got reunited with her children. Her house, by the way, had been taken over to become the Cuban embassy. And she went to Manchester, England, and she entered a program in poverty alleviation, got a master's degree, designed a project to empower Addis. She came back with her husband, the deposed mayor. They lived in a much more modest house, and she set up a ministry with 40,000 poor people in 4 kabelis. That's what they call inner city ghettos in Addis. Jember has built hundreds of houses, dozens of schools, dozens of clinics. She has a job incubator. Every time somebody sends a container, she gets the welder torture people out there to cut holes in it, and they make it an office. And they use it. They tip it upside down and they make it into a permanent building. And it's like erector sets, keep going out in the... Jember has had to fight through 2 coups in the government since. The government of Ethiopia spends 70% of its money on military. They're re-tribalizing by design to divide and conquer the people because the government is run by Tigrayans from the north. They are threatened by the overwhelming superiority or in numbers of the Amharic group. And so Jember's in the middle of that as a sign of hope. Jember just finished her doctor's degree at 60. And her doctoral project with me was creating an institute to teach what she has learned. And this summer will be the opening class at the institute. Before he died, her late husband made me promise she would get a doctorate. And we did, kept the promise. And so Jember is a big mama. She has worked with 40,000 people. She could have gone off into the sunset with her children. Nobody would have blamed her. But instead, she got her master's, she got her doctorate. She's back there in the city. Now, I wish I could have taken you to Nairobi. Oh, you'll always go there. If you go to Africa, everything stops in Nairobi. How about Accra? I wish I could tell you some things about youth gangs there. It's amazing things going on. Or even Lagos. So many things happening in Lagos. We're partners, developing a partnership with the seminary there. 1/4 of all Africans live in Lagos, and I mean in the whole continent. 1/4 of all Africans live in Nigeria. And so Lagos is the biggest black city in the world, by far. And so it is amazing to see the explosion of the church in cities of Africa. I hope this encourages you. Africa is becoming the center of gravity of God's church. Africa was visited by our Lord in person. Africa is where the church has a gigantic contest with Islam. And Africa is where the cities are mushrooming and where we see people are learning how to do urban ministry. Pope Shenouda sent me a student Bishoy L. Anthony, the librarian of St. Anthony, the Desert Fathers Library. Got his degree from our seminary in Seattle last year. He was sent because they want to do community development in the Coptic Orthodox Church, in places like Alexandria and Asyut. It is amazing to me. The church in Africa, we still think of jungles, huh? Hutus, Hottentots, and people going with spears. They're wearing three-piece suits, and they're organizing international congresses. They're building mega churches in caves, out of garbage, out of prisons, off the streets, and in the ghettos. It's marvelous what God is doing in Africa. And I've just done this just to give you a little feel for how missions has changed. It's no longer out in the jungle. This mission has moved to the city, and God's church is there, and I'm very grateful. Long live Africa, and long live the African church. They will soon be the majority of God's church in the world. Praise the Lord.
Amen.